getting started at home, because you have a lot of family history at home, and it makes sense to know what you've got to start with before you start looking elsewhere. Interviewing relatives. These people are a gold mine of information that will help direct your search and help you with your process. Organizing. You quickly accumulate a lot of information, and if you're like me, a lot of paperwork, and you need to keep it organized so that you can share it with others efficiently and also know what you have and what you need to get. And then you need to evaluate your sources, whether what you're looking at is a good source, whether it makes sense for your family, and is it a credible source. And as a bonus, we're going to do a quick blurb on DNA. So everybody's family history research begins with yourself. You've got to start with yourself and work one step backwards in time. You know yourself better than anybody else. You know yourself better than your descendants will ever know you. Start documenting your life. So start with yourself. You are the latest link in your family's chain of ancestry, and you don't want to break the link, break the chain, or skip any of the links. If you skip, you're going to go off in the wrong direction. Never start researching a famous relative or story or try to make them to fit into your family. A lot of people who, when they come to us, they say, you know, I've heard I'm related to so-and-so, and that's what I want to prove. Well, that's not as easy to do as you might think. Plus, the chances that you're related to that person, unless you've done all of the genealogy work that proves it, is kind of slim. And by looking for a connection to a specific person, you're more likely to view information that supports your theory and ignore information that disproves your theory. It's a common bias that we all have. It's called confirmation bias. And despite what Ancestry likes to tell you in their commercials, you do have to know what you're looking for, or you will find anything that looks good, whether it's your family or not. I think I was rather lucky when I started family history research over 40 years ago, because my maiden name is Johnson, and it is the second most common name in the country. So you really have to know what you're looking for, or you're tracking down the wrong Johnsons. A misstep early in your quest can derail your search in unimaginable ways. If you start following the wrong path, you're going to end up somewhere you don't want to be. So you're going to start at home, you're going to canvass your home, and you're going to start looking for birth certificates and announcements. Now, this certificate I've got down here in the bottom right is actually a hospital certificate. It is not a legal birth certificate, but if you have a copy of this at home, it gives you all the information you need to get the actual birth certificate from the state of Ohio. Marriage records. This one's from 1937 in Marion County, Ohio. And they don't always look like this. This is the official record, but this is a record that was filled out by a church. This is from 1917, and it was the Church of St. Anthony of Padua, and that's in Cleveland. Death certificates. You can get those from your local health department in the county that the death occurred in after 1908. And this is one from 1929 or 30, something like that. It's very hard to read. Family Bible. In this case, this is just a family sheet out of the Bible. Notice that the handwriting is the same throughout. This means the information was written down at one setting, and probably the person writing all this information down did not have personal knowledge of all the events. In this case, this page was filled out by the last name on the list, Lydia Heighton, and it starts off with her father's birth and her parents' marriage up in the upper left, and obviously she would not have had personal knowledge about those events. School records and yearbooks. This is my brother's high school yearbook, and for my safety, I'm not showing you his picture because it was the 70s and he looks like it. Letters and diaries, you might have those at home if you're lucky. Heirlooms, another wonderful thing, and the story that goes along with heirlooms tells you a lot about the family. If you have heirlooms to pass on, you already are ahead of a lot of people who don't. Photo albums, who are these people? How are they related to you? What are they doing? What time period is this? This is all part of your family history. And if you're like me, you have a lot of unidentified photos at home that nobody ever wrote the names on the back. Military records. This is actually a regimental flag from the Civil War. One of my ancestors was in the 91st Regiment. And this is a discharge. This is from the Navy. Again, it's the Civil War. He was a seaman, a common seaman on the riverboats in the Civil War. Now, this is an interesting little document. This is alien registration for Maria de Salvo. She came to this country in 1915. That was the marriage record you saw from the Church of Anthony de Padua earlier from 1917. And here it is, 1942. She's still not a citizen, so she had to register as an alien in the country. She later did get her naturalization. She got her citizenship records. And this is an excerpt from a will for one of my ancestors, the last will and testament. This is from like 1881. It's very handwritten and unusual for the time period. He is giving everything over to his wife to administer. You don't see that in the 1880s usually. So you start at home. And we have a couple of lists of at-home sources. Family Search, besides being a wonderful resource for people, has a wonderful wiki where you can get all sorts of information on how to do research. And in this case, it's telling you what kind of family information to gather when you're looking at at-home resources. And this is from a blog. Interview relatives. I can't emphasize this enough. Every genealogist I know has stories about, oh, I didn't get to interview so-and-so and now they're gone. I have those stories myself. You think you're going to have time forever and you just don't. So you want to interview your relatives as much as possible. Be ready. Not everybody's ready to talk about family history. Sometimes it's very painful and sometimes there's embarrassment, and you've got to be aware of that. So these are guidelines on how to do the family interview. First of all, be considerate of the person being interviewed. If they look like they're getting tired or confused, maybe it's time to back off and come again another day or something. Be prepared, however you're recording it, whether you're doing an audio or video recording, or if you're doing hand notes like I did back in the day, be prepared. Have all the equipment you need. If you're doing a video recorder, make sure you have battery backup and that sort of thing. If you're doing it by writing, make sure you've got all the pens and pencils and paper that you need. Have your questions ready. You know, there's plenty of lists of questions that you can get. Have them ready. Don't come at somebody with a list of 100 questions and expect them to sit down with you for 4 hours and answer all of them. When people are talking, don't interrupt them. Oftentimes it triggers memories that you would never think of asking about. You need to document the interview with the person, with their name, the place and time, and their relationship with you. Ask if anybody else has worked on the family history. Do they have old documents or photos to share? Don't be surprised if they don't want to hand over their priceless, photos for you to take off. Be ready to take photocopies of them in some way or form. Also, bring something you can share with them. Don't come to the table empty. Have information that you can share with them. Oh, did you know so-and-so was in the Civil War? That sort of thing. Keep interviews to a reasonable length. There's a reason that most classes last for 45 minutes. That's the maximum time period that people can concentrate for at one point. So keep that in mind. Follow up what you've learned in official records. If somebody tells you, oh, Aunt so-and-so was married 3 times, can you find all those marriage records? You need to do that, because oftentimes people are exaggerating. Not on purpose, it's just the stories that they've been told and they're passing them on. And remember, not everyone will look upon your family research as a wonderful adventure that you see it to be. Don't alienate your relatives. My own mother had no interest in family history. For her and several other people that I interviewed, she says, the past is the past. Why do you want to dig that up? And of course, we all have our reasons why we want to dig that up. So list of more guidelines. This is from LaGuardia Community College. It was apparently a program that they had, and then they created this list. And this is how to interview relatives. Notice that this lady here, she's all set up. She's got all this wonderful equipment, and the people have mics on them. I think she was well prepared. Interview relatives. This is the young family reunion, and these are the people in the middle right here who always tell the stories at the young family reunion. So I take my little notebook and I sit next to them and I write down everything they say. You're going to be asking about full given names. For example, these two people, their dad was always known as Dan. However, his name was Clarence. I did not learn that until I started doing genealogy. You want birth dates, their parents' names, their siblings, children, aunts, uncles, marriage dates, death dates, military, all this stuff you want to ask about. And you want information that fills in. You don't just want to be dates and places. You want to know about careers. You know, why was so-and-so on the work on the railroad? You know, what prompted him to do that? Did you have family games that you played? Family traditions that you passed on? What holidays did you celebrate? What schools did you go to? Did they go to school? Military service. Both Uncle Charlie there on the left and Dan there in the middle, both were in the military. Uncle Charlie was in the Navy and Dan was in the Air Force. This is a kind of a difficult one to ask about, income. People don't want to talk about how much money they made or anything, but you don't state it that way, you know. Were you well-to-do? Or, you know, it's like, no, we were poor as church mice. You just never know what stories are going to come up. And what religion? This will help you when you need to find records and the governmental records die out. Then if you know what the religion the family was, you know what church records to look for. So, and then we have a couple of websites with lists of questions to ask. And please know that at the end of the session, we will be giving you handouts that includes all these information. So don't be worrying about copying down all these websites. This question down here in the bottom right reminds me of another family reunion. Somebody in the family had given me all their family photos, and they had all the pictures of all these little kids, and they were all blonde little kids. So I knew to ask Aunt Wildy about it. And we sat down and she started doing okay and everything, but after about 40 minutes, she got tired, and I knew it was time to wrap it up, and I thanked her very much for what she was able to tell me. Organizing your resources. Even once you start pulling things from your home and the pictures and everything, you're going to need to start organizing them. And it's a struggle for every genealogist. About 5 years ago, I took a class from a nationally known genealogist on how to organize your information. And at the beginning of the session, he admitted he had 3 large Rubbermaid tubs full of information waiting to be organized. Yes, we need to organize, stay on top of it, but it's something we all struggle with. So don't feel bad if you struggle with it too. Things that will help us organize our information is ancestor forms. This shows us generation by generation going back who our ancestors were. And we'll talk more about these things in a few minutes. Family group sheets. Anytime there's a couple, particularly if the couple has children, you want to have a family group sheet to show how they're related and all the basic information like birth, deaths, marriages, that sort of information, all in one place. A research journal. This helps you keep track of where you've looked for information. I think you should have one on every person that you're working on that shows you where you've looked for information on this person, whether you found it, what information you still need to find. It helps keep you on track. It keeps you, organized. And you want to use standard formats for recording sources. And we'll be going through that a little bit more. And you want to have your citations. Citations tell you where you got your information. So if you see something that doesn't look right, or maybe you wrote it down incompletely, you can go back to your citation, find that source again, and look at it again. And then we're going to cover filing and storage systems. And this is a personal preference, what you want to use in this case. This is an ancestor chart and what it usually looks like. Over here on the left, you always start with your name there on the line on the far left. So your name goes there. Then your father's name goes there. And you can see underneath there's a place for birth, birth date, place of birth, married, place of marriage, died, place of death, and a name for a place for a spouse. Your spouse would have another chart that tracks their family. So after you do yourself, you do your father up above, and then you drop down here, do your mother, and then you're going to do your grandfather on your father's side. So this is your dad's dad, and dad's mom, mom's dad, mom's mom. And you keep following it out to the right. Now, you will be chart number 1. The names on the right are going to be continued on another chart, and the next chart would be chart number 2, and then 3, and 4. This is a family group sheet, and while I've got this in front of me, notice how down here in the bottom it says write in pencil so corrections can be made. These are worksheets, so they get messy really quickly. If you write down somebody was born in 1923 and then you find out actually they were born at the end of December 1922, you need to be able to make corrections. So write everything in pencil. This is a family group sheet. As you can see, it's got the who's preparing the information up above, and then it's got a place for the husband's name, and then his birth information, if he was christened, marriage information, died, where he was buried, a place for father and mother, and a place for other wives. Now, other wives would have he would have a second sheet with these other wives. If they have 3 or 4 spouses, you're going to have family group sheet for each of them. And then there's a place for the wife's name with all of her information. And down at the bottom, we've got a place for the children's name and just the start of their information, because every child who survives long enough to have be married is going to have their own family group sheet. But it gives you enough to say, okay, I need to look for the family group sheet for such and such. This comes in handy both when you're researching and when you're asking for help. If you come in with something like this already filled out, we're 3 steps ahead when we go to help you. And this is a research journal. They've got them numbered. I'm not sure how important the numbering is, but it gives you the date that you were looking at the particular source, call number, the condition, was it in good condition, was it a transcription, was it badly copied or something. I have looked at church records that have been in floods and fires, and but that's the only information we have on a particular event. And so you need to put all that information down. A description of the source, if it's got a title, you use the title. What you were looking for in this piece of source, the results, whether you found it or not, and then if you're numbering your documents, you're going to have this. Again, you want to have a research journal for each person that you're working on. And yes, you will have multiple pages of this if you work at this for very long. Using standard formats for recording information. This is very important because it makes things work more smoothly, both for yourself and other people. If you're looking at a page full of names or full of information, but all the surnames are in capital letters, they're going to jump out at you. This comes in handy when you're browsing through lots of records because they're not indexed well and you're looking for a particular name. If it's written in the large letters, it jumps out at you. Women are listed by their maiden name because in our culture, women often change their name when they get married. It's not a requirement, and that may change eventually. But it's easier if you always list them by their maiden name because that's their birth name. Dates are written by day, month, year. February 15, 1978. A bad example, 7/12/18. Is that July 12th or is it December 7th? If you write the European way, it would be December 7th, not July 12th. Is this 1918, 1818, or is it 2018? You don't know, so you write it out this way. I prefer using the word for the month. Place names should go from the smallest, the most local, to the larger. In this case, I've got Brunswick, Medina County, Ohio, United States, planet Earth. And avoid abbreviations or provide a key to which abbreviations you use. I use a lot of abbreviations. I use the postal code abbreviations for state names, but not everybody agrees on what those are going to be. I tend to use the 3-letter abbreviation for each month of the year, but again, that's going to be personal preference. But make sure that if you're using abbreviations, you provide a key so other people know what you're doing. Document your sources. Your goal is to make it possible for someone to retrace the steps in your research, so follow these guidelines. That someone oftentimes is yourself. You're trying to figure out, okay, I got from step A to step C. Is B really the way I want to go, or did I go wrong somewhere? You need to retrace your steps sometimes. Plus, when you're sharing the information to somebody else, you need to tell them how you got from A to C. So, put citations on all your sources, and this is another family search wiki, and it shows a lot of examples of source citations. And when you're interviewing the relatives, we talked about this already a little bit, record the date and location of the interview, the full name of the person you're interviewing and their relationship to you. And when you're using an internet source, cite the full name of the resource, the URL, the date you accessed it, and how you accessed it. If you had to go through a paid database, you need to let people know that so they're not trying to get it for free from somewhere else. And for government records, list the location, again, the city, county, state, the volume number, page number, and what office you found it in, and the date you found it. Oftentimes records move, and if you know it once it was in the probate record and now it's in the archives, it helps you to track it down again. And when using books, list the full title, author, copyright date, page number, and where you found the book. When you're doing bibliographies, oftentimes they want the author first. There's a real reason I put the title down first, because often you remember the title, but not the author. And if you have doubts about what information to list in your source citation, consult Evidence Explained by Elizabeth Shown Mills. It is about a 500-page book, maybe even more than that, but you don't have to read it page by page. You just use the index, find what you're looking for. Great resource. Organizing your sources. Yeah, this is the one we all have problems now. Write down everything. Do not rely on your memory. You keep thinking, oh, I remember that. But when you get home, you've talked about so much, or you've done so much, and it's like, what was that thing I wanted to remember? I didn't write it down. Write it down. Document it somehow. If you're not writing it down, of course, you can always use your video on your smartphone or something like that, but document it somehow. When you're organizing your information on people, you're going to organize them in reverse chronological order from the most recent to the oldest. That means for people, you're going to do their death information, and then you're going to do, like their marriage and their birth, filling in with other documents as appropriate, but in reverse chronological order. Set a goal of what information you want to find out next. Your ancestral charts and family group sheets will highlight what information is missing and are key to performing research efficiently. I do this all the time. When I'm helping other people, I do the ancestor chart, and then I get to a person and it's like, where's all the information? First of all, I need to get it organized. Then I need it all in one place so that I can see it at a glance. This is what the ancestor charts and family group sheets do. And then you see where you don't have information filled in. That's what's missing and what you need to look for next. You want to trace all your grandparents, and then we talked about the family group sheets and should be prepared for each person listed on a family group sheet. None of my brothers have had children, but they have family group sheets for all of the significant others that they've been with. Use research journals to document where you've already looked and what your findings were. Don't go looking at the same place time and time again. I've got to say that this is one of the things that I find myself doing. It's like, oh, have I looked for them there? And it's like, when I get there, it's like, oh yeah, I have looked here. I've seen this information before. Don't do that. Filing and storage systems. First of all, you need a system and you need to apply it, and it needs to be what makes sense to you. You can purchase genealogy software, but not everything can be done with the genealogy software. At least I've not found it to be satisfactory for what I want to do. So usually you have both. One of the options is binders. You have a binder for each surname using tab dividers for each family. And each tab section will have an ancestral chart, family group chart, family documents, the birth, death, and marriage records, except in the order, and a research journal. You're going to have at least that information in each of the tab section. I started out with binders, but I have moved on to hanging file folders because there just wasn't enough room in the binders. So, and you can use file boxes if you've only got a few names and you're just getting started, or file cabinets. I actually have 2 file cabinets full of family history. Arranged alphabetically by surname. At least that's what I do. That's what makes sense to me. And they can be color-coded for each of your 4 grandparents. So like all of your paternal line is going to be blue, and then your paternal mother's line would be green, and so forth. Just choose a system that works for you and makes sense to you. That's what's important. Computer storage. A lot of my files are now on computers, and I'm going to have file folders, and they're going to be organized by surname, containing scans of all the above documents. I am working on getting that done because my daughters don't want all that paper coming down to them someday. And computer software. This is the top 10 reviews of the best genealogy software. They've been doing this for a number of years. I think they're pretty thorough. I really like what they have to say about all of the different software. Some of the software is more expensive than others, but one of the nice things about this review is that it tells you what they do and don't do, what features they have. And you're going to be using basic programs like word processing and spreadsheets. When I have a family group that I'm trying to figure out who all the kids were, because in the 1910 census, the mother says she has had 11 children, and I've only got names for 8 of them, I use the spreadsheets to look at all the information I have on the family to figure out, okay, what names am I missing for that family? And you're going to use backup systems, particularly if you're on the computer, because we know computers crash. You can have paper copies stored at a different location, an external backup drive, that's my preferred method, and cloud storage. Now, cloud storage is a topic all in itself, and Lisa has talked about that in the past, and this was a really nice overview of cloud storage and file sharing services that I thought was very useful. Now, evaluating your resources. If you don't evaluate your resources, you're turning out garbage, basically, because you're just grabbing information and you don't know whether it's good or not. So you need to examine everything you look at to decide whether it's really valid. So relevance. Does it fit with the known facts on your ancestor, or is it conflicting evidence? Again, this was something, being a Johnson, I had to watch very carefully. You know, I knew where my dad was born, and I knew where his dad was born. And luckily their names were unusual, but past that, all the names were like Williams and Johns and Georges. And it's like, you've got to know which ones you're looking for. You know, if it says that they were born 20 years after the time period you know your ancestor was born, it's probably not good information for your research. Is it a primary or secondary resource? Primary records are written down at the time of the event by somebody who had personal knowledge of the event. A good example of this is birth and death records done by a doctor. The doctor's there during the birth, so he's witnessing the information that he knew at the time, and he was there at the death. However, when you get to the birth information on a death certificate, that same doctor who was there at the death was probably not there at the birth. The person providing the information on the birth, usually a child or a stepchild or something like that, was not there at the birth. So the information on a death record about a birth would be considered a secondary resource. It was recorded at a later time by somebody who would not have had personal knowledge of the event. Primary resources are always preferred, but you get back far enough in time and you can't find them, so you have to find enough secondary resources that corroborate each other to make your point, to prove your point. Is it a facsimile or transcription of a original record? Oftentimes when people are transcribing information, we're all human, we all make mistakes, and those mistakes are written down. A facsimile, was it a good facsimile? Was it like a photocopy of the original record? Oftentimes in libraries, you see microfilms of the original records. And so you have to think about what the condition of the record. Is it a facsimile, a transcription, or is it an original record? When was the information recorded and who recorded it? This goes back to the primary and secondary resources, but also why was it recorded? Birth and death information was first recorded for health reasons. They wanted to be able to track health data. And it was only later they said, well, it'd be helpful, when we're looking at all these John Johnsons to know which one's which. So let's include the parent's name or the wife's name or something like that. So when was the information recorded and why was it recorded? It might not have been recorded for the reason that we're looking at it today. Census records are a good example of that. They're recorded to apportion members for the House of Representatives. But these days, it has a lot of information. In the past, it had even more information. Is it circumstantial information? Are the facts inferred from information that's in the record? A will or a probate record will infer that somebody has died. Oftentimes, they don't tell you the date of the death, but you know that it had to have been before the estate was probated, or they wouldn't be probating the estate. So that would be inferred evidence. Is it collateral evidence? Collateral evidence is part of the record, but has nothing to do with the reason the record exists. I see this in military records all the time. They list all sorts of information that they feel makes their case for getting their pension or something like that, but it often has nothing to do with their military record. I was the Christian young who joined from such and such, and then we moved here and we moved there, and then my wife died, and these are my children, and now I live here and I don't have enough money to live on, please give me a pension. Those are collateral evidence. Is it likely the facts were misrepresented either erroneously or on purpose? Erroneously, people transcribe numbers all the time. I've seen that in the family histories that are published on in county histories. Oftentimes the people printing it up transcribe the numbers. So, they said he died in 1859 and really it was 1845. So that kind of thing. Or was it done on purpose? Somebody lying about their age, either to get in the military or to get married or something like that. Or misrepresenting their age to appear younger than what they are. Think about these things. Conflicting evidence must be analyzed to determine the truth. And that you have to do with nearly everything. If it conflicts with what you know, why? Where's the problem? What is the best source? What makes the most sense for what you know about the time period and the people? Know the history of an area so that you know what makes sense for that area. Finally, you want to use the Genealogical Proof Standard to reach a reasonable conclusion. And the Genealogical Proof Standard is reasonably exhaustive research. Have you searched all the records you can find on a person? Have you looked for a birth record? And if you can't find a birth record, can you find a baptism record? If you can't find a baptism record, can you find a birth announcement in the newspaper? There are all sorts of different ways to get to the same information. You need to look in all the places. Complete and accurate source citations. Let other people know where you got your information so they know that they can trust what you've given them. Thorough analysis and correlation, and this goes back to analyzing your information and making sure it makes sense. Resolution of conflicting evidence, and soundly written conclusion based on the strongest evidence. I know that Joshua Johnson was born in 1792 because he was such and such age when he joined the War of 1812. He was such and such age in the 1850 census, and he was such and such age when he died in 1859. And for more information on the Genealogical Proof Standard, see the Board of Certified Genealogical Society website for certification and ethics standards. This is your bonus. Yay! DNA. Everybody's all excited about DNA today. So we thought we'd cover some of the basics so you have an idea of what to expect. First, strengths. It can link you to living people. That is one of its best strengths. I have been contacted by several cousins that helped fill in blanks on my family tree, and I was able to help them also. You know you're related. The DNA tells you you're related, and then you go back to the records to say, okay, this is how we're related. It will give you a snapshot of your estimated ethnic makeup. Estimated is bold and italicized for a reason. These are all estimates. They're comparing your DNA with what other people have said about their ancestry, and those people are living people. They're not actually comparing your DNA to people who lived 200 years ago where your family came from or anything like that. They change all the time because the pool that they're looking at changes all the time. Both family tree DNA and ancestry DNA just updated their ethnic estimates. I lost some of my German, lost some of my Iberian Peninsula, gained more Scandinavian. I don't know where that Scandinavian's coming from, I gotta tell you. I keep saying it's the Vikings. And it can help you break through a brick wall. This is what we all hope for, that it helps you break through the brick wall. And it does for some people. But when you've been researching for 40 years, before DNA came around, the DNA can't help you break through a brick wall from 200 years ago. There's just not enough DNA to do that generally. Okay, weaknesses can reveal unexpected family relationships. This happens more often than anybody wants to think about, but it happens all the time nonetheless. People take the test, because somebody said, let's do this, and they do it. Then they find out that, hey, we're only half siblings, or I'm not my father's daughter, all sorts of things, all sorts of books written about this. I've read a lot of them. And they're very interesting, but they're traumatic for the people who get affected by this, because it's like what you thought you knew about yourself, all of a sudden, half of it's not true. It can be very traumatic. And then you're reaching out maybe towards a biological family, and sometimes they're warm and open and welcoming, and sometimes they just shut you down and say, I don't want anything to do with you. And that can be traumatic too. It can invalidate family stories and lore. My family had a story that my dad's great-great-grandmother was 3/4 Cherokee. Talked to people who knew her when she was still alive. Oh yeah, she's 3/4 Cherokee, dark complected and all this stuff and everything. Well, I've been tested by all of the major companies and shared my DNA with a couple more, and there's no Native American DNA in our family. None at all. Not only that, I'm one of 8 siblings, and 5 of us have been tested, and none of us have any Native American DNA. So that's one family story we have to throw out the window. Maybe that's where that Scandinavian comes from. I don't know. Cost, it can be expensive. What I tell people is you look for the sales. A couple times a year, all of the major companies put their DNA tests on sale. They do it at Christmas time. They'll do it at Easter. They'll do it around Mother's Day and Father's Day. Look for those sales. Most of them cost around $100 right now, but if you get them on sale, you can get them for about $50. But again, you want to be, if you're doing DNA testing, you usually want to test with multiple companies because you want the largest pool of people to compare your DNA against. And if you're looking for the largest pool, then Ancestry DNA has the largest. I forget what their numbers are, but it's in the millions. There are different types of DNA tests. There's the Y-DNA test that follows the paternal line only. This father follows the father's 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 line. Mitochondrial DNA follows the maternal line only. That's the mother's 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 line. It's not as useful because it's so generic that it doesn't help narrow things down. Where the Y-DNA, you know your father came from Western Ireland or something like that. And then the autosomal DNA, which is what most of the companies do, the autosomal DNA testing, and it mixes all the family lines. And I've got this little chart here that shows you what I'm talking about. The Y-DNA is the blue line here following the father's 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 line. Mitochondrial is mother's 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 line. And the autosomal is all of them together. So you get all the mix of in between here. Top DNA testing companies, 23andMe. They started out as a medical DNA testing company, but they've expanded into the genealogy sphere. If you do test with them, they'll all the time be sending your emails about, okay, this is your chance of getting such and such a disease, or take this survey so we know how you compare with other people that share your DNA profile, that kind of information. The DNA medical information, they don't test every mutation that can cause a disease or something like that. Like the one for breast cancer, I think they did 2 or 4 or something out of hundreds that can cause the breast cancer. So Ancestry recently just started offering medical information. And you have to have a subscription to Ancestry to get the fullest access to message other people and things like that. They do have the largest pool of people who've been tested though. Family tree DNA, this is the one I first tested with because it was what they call, we used to call it the genealogist testing company. And it's the only company right now that's offering the Y-DNA and mitochondrial DNA testing at this time. Though I have seen mitochondrial DNA testing stuff come up on some of the others, but again, that's very generic. Living DNA, MyHeritage. And then for a comparison of the best DNA test, got this website, and it's got a wonderful chart on it. Smarter Hobby, because genealogy is the #2 hobby. Wirecutter, Best DNA Test, and CNET, which is a computer website. Best DNA Test for 2020. And it tells you, the charts say, okay, if you're looking for this, these the tests provide this information. So that's why I say, see those charts, it's good information. Making the most of your DNA test. GEDmatch, you might have heard about GEDmatch in the news because this is the website that a lot of law enforcement agencies have been using to track down suspects in different high-profile cases. What they do is they find somebody who's got a certain percentage of DNA matching with the DNA they found at a crime scene, and then they find information, share information on the ancestor chart and the family group charts of these people, and then they find out, okay, who of their relatives was living in the right place at the right time to have done this crime, and then they try to confirm that suspicion and using traditional law enforcement techniques. That's the big one. They've been bought out recently, but so far you're still able to access information for free, though they do have tiered payments where you can get more and more information. DNA Painter, it's an easy to use tool. that helps people make sense of testing. The creator of this one came out of England. I was surprised when I watched him do a webinar, and it's like, oh, he's got a British accent. How cool is that? Leeds method, this is one that Lauren has recommended, and it helps you visualize how your close cousins are related to you and to each other. And I highly recommend this book by Blaine Bettinger. He does a lot of the webinars and programs on DNA testing. He's very logical. He's got science background and legal background and all of this stuff going on, but he makes it understandable. And this is the book I refer to when I have questions. Now, these are other sources you will use going forward. Census records. Lauren's going to be doing a class on that come November. Vital records, those are your birth and marriage and death records. Military records, church records, land records, immigration records, probate records, printed histories, online databases such as Ancestry, Family Search, Bolt 3. This is just a small list of all the resources that you will be using going forward. And researching your family history can be a rewarding, lifelong mission. Start out wisely and you can avoid missteps and leave a legacy for generations to come. So, Lauren?
Yes, thank you, Kathy, for your in-depth presentation on how people can get started, plus our bonus on DNA. That's very helpful. I sent the ancestor chart and the family group sheet and the research journal earlier. I'm going to send our handout for this presentation right now as well. You can download those from the chat box. And we should also send those out. We'll send those out in an email tomorrow as well. So far, I haven't seen any questions, but we'll give folks a couple more minutes here in case anybody does have something that they want to send to me through the chat box to ask us.
While we're sitting here, I'm going to say hi to everybody. I saw that Tom Hilberg from the Historical Society and Genealogical Society has been online, as well as Pat Morgan, current president of the Medina County Genealogical Society. We partner with both of these groups on a number of occasions for different projects.
And I just want to mention too that if you're interested in family history, if you're just getting started and want to kind of get some more options out there, this year for our community reading program, we're calling it One Community, Many Stories, and we're theming it around family history. So I'm going to send you a link to the website that you can check out. We've got activities for families. There's several books that you can read on this topic. Plus there's a lot of good extra guides on there as well. Okay, so we are getting a couple questions here. One question being asked is if the library has genealogy records for Franklin Sylvester.
Interesting. We do have a copy of his will, and because he was a prominent person, he's listed in some of the history books, but we do not have a Franklin Sylvester biography or a lot of family history on him.
Then we do have another question about how to access information that is outside of the country. So we're looking for non-United States records.
Well, Ancestry does have access to some of those records. They're very good with England and Germany, and they're spreading out a little bit more. And I don't know if everybody's aware, but from now until the end of the year, you can access Ancestry for free. I always go through the library's website and then it asks for my library card number. I enter that. But because of the COVID, because of the pandemic, they're offering that through the end of the year. So Ancestry is one resource that we use online. The other is Family Search, because they have been gathering records from all over the world for the past how many years? Decades and decades. And they're making them available on their website. So those are two resources online that you can use. Once you move beyond that, then you're looking at resources within the country, like there's a National Archives in England, for example, getting access to the church records and everything like that. Usually there are local groups that can help you with that.
Attention members, the library will be closing in 30 minutes. If you would like to apply for a library card or pay a fine, please come to the customer service desk at
Oh, and I think Kathy, I just muted you there for a minute. We've got our announcements going on here. I did just want to add, especially Family Search has a lot of great records for overseas. If you have any Eastern European ancestry, that's great for that. A lot of French resources, and a lot of those aren't necessarily searchable right from the main page, but you can get to them through the catalog, which I'm sure Lisa will be talking about 2 weeks from tonight during her program on Family Search. So that might be especially useful for you to tune into that. And I did just through the chat box also send the link to the genealogy databases that Medina County District Library makes available to our members. That includes the Ancestry Library Edition, which, as Kathy mentioned, is currently free to use through the end of the year from home. Normally you would have to access that on from the library's website while you're at the library itself. There's also several other resources you can use from home with your library card. We just added the newspapers.com, which has newspapers from around the world, plus Fold 3 is a great database for military records, and both of those you can get to right with your library card from your home. We do have another question coming in. An individual is asking, my grandparents' records were burned in a fire and the cemetery lost records because of, I think, a merger. So, you know, I would encourage you to look for record substitutes. Kathy, is that what you would suggest for that too?
Definitely, definitely. So the church records are destroyed, so maybe you don't have a marriage or a birth record from the church, but then maybe there were newspaper announcements, for an example, or maybe I forget which of the census, maybe you know this you should know this off the top of your head, Lauren, that's ask how long the couple's been married. So you can say, okay, we know they were married such and such year because they reported it in the census. Sometimes you have to look for all sorts of different resources.
Yes, and newspapers might be able to fill in some gaps for you too. So just keep in mind there's a lot of options out there that might be able to fill in if there's record loss for an event that you're trying to document. Does anybody else have any questions right now? Okay, well, I think I am going to send you in the chat box here if you, let's see here, something might have just come in. There's also a little bit of a question asking about, you know, different spellings of an owner's name and how that could cause some record loss as well. You know, we always say there's not just one way to spell a surname. There's, I think even in one branch of my family tree, there's 5 brothers and they spell it 3 different ways. So you can get a whole range. So you're going to want to think about it more phonetically in terms of those variations on spelling. That's a pretty common event there.
One of the things I've also found is you have to think about how a letter is written. Like I had an ancestor named Tagg, T-A-G-G, but I have found the name indexed under Lag, L-A-G-G, because they couldn't tell the difference between the L and T, or S-A-G-G, because just floppy handwriting or different handwriting than what people expected. So think about how letters are written too.
We don't want to go too far over our hour here. I'm sending in through the chat right now the email address for the Medina County District Library genealogy team. And if you think of additional questions as you're working through your research, please do contact us. We love a good mystery, and we are always happy to help you. And we would welcome hearing from you and help you with your research. I think that's, we're probably ready to sign off for tonight. Are you ready to?
Lauren, do we want to talk a little bit about what we're doing for people during the pandemic to help them with their research? Usually we would do one-on-ones.
Sure. So normally we would do in-person one-on-ones where you could come into the department and we would sit down right next to you and work with you through different resources and on the computer. And since that's not really possible with social distancing right now, we are actually offering virtual one-on-ones. So that can be by a phone call, we can help you through email, or we could even set up a video call individually with you like this. We recommend that if you're interested in taking advantage of that service, that you send us a pretty specific question, probably focused on one person. Make sure you include their name, any guess you have on when or where they were born, when and where they died, and we are happy to help you work on those projects. So, and as Kathy mentioned, we do have classes upcoming. There's 3 more in this series, and we hope that we will have many of you join us in those as well.
Okay, good night, everybody.
We're going to sign off. Thank you all for coming tonight, and hope to see you in the future.